The crack of a gunshot echoed across the plains, jolting Penelope Hawthorne from her fitful slumber as the stagecoach rattled along the dusty trail toward Whispering Creek, Wyoming Territory, in the summer of 1876. Her hand flew to her chest, heart pounding wildly beneath her travel-worn dress, only to realize the sound had been merely a figment of her anxious dreams filled with the faceless man awaiting her arrival, the man she had agreed to marry through nothing more than exchanged letters and a desperate need to escape her circumstances back east. "First time out west, miss?" The elderly woman seated across from her smiled knowingly, her weathered face a map of years spent under the harsh frontier sun. Penelope nodded, adjusting the small locket around her neck, the last gift from her deceased parents. "Yes, madam. I'm to be married upon my arrival." "Mail order bride, then?" The question held no judgment, only the practical curiosity of those accustomed to the ways of frontier life. "I prefer to think of it as a correspondence courtship," Penelope replied with as much dignity as she could muster while being jostled about. In truth, she had little illusion about her situation. At 22, with no family and dwindling funds after her parents' passing, the advertisements seeking wives for Western settlers had seemed a practical, if desperate, solution. The stagecoach crested a hill, revealing a valley below where Whispering Creek nestled between rolling grasslands and distant mountains. The settlement was larger than Penelope had imagined, a proper main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising proudly against the vast blue sky. "Almost there, folks," called the driver from above. "Whispering Creek coming up." Penelope smoothed her skirts and checked her appearance in a small hand mirror. Her chestnut hair remained mostly pinned, though several strands had escaped during the journey. Dark circles shadowed her hazel eyes, testament to nights of uneasy sleep. She pinched her cheeks for color, wondering if Jefferson Burke, her intended, would find her appealing or disappointing. When the stagecoach finally lurched to a stop before the town's only hotel, Penelope peered anxiously through the window. A small crowd had gathered, as stagecoach arrivals were apparently noteworthy events in Whispering Creek. She scanned the faces, searching for the man who might match the formal, somewhat stiff descriptions from Jefferson's letters: a successful businessman, owner of the town's largest general store, respectable and promising stability. The driver opened the door, and Penelope accepted his hand as she descended, legs stiff from the journey. The dusty street felt alien beneath her city boots, the air smelling of horses, wood smoke, and something indefinably wild. "Miss Hawthorne." A well-dressed man stepped forward, his perfectly trimmed mustache and expensive suit setting him apart from the more roughly clothed townsfolk. "Jefferson Burke. Welcome to Whispering Creek." Penelope curtsied slightly, studying the man she had agreed to marry. He was handsome in a conventional way, perhaps 15 years her senior, with a businesslike demeanor that matched his letters perfectly. "Mr. Burke. How lovely to finally meet you." Jefferson nodded, gesturing to a young boy who rushed forward to collect Penelope's luggage. "I trust your journey was satisfactory?" "I've arranged accommodations for you at Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house until our wedding on Sunday. 4 days should provide ample time for you to rest and prepare." 4 days. The reality of her situation struck Penelope anew. In just 4 days, she would bind herself to this stranger in marriage. Jefferson continued speaking about arrangements and schedules, but his voice faded as Penelope's attention was drawn to a commotion further down the street. A magnificent chestnut stallion thundered into town, its rider controlling the powerful animal with a casual expertise that spoke of years in the saddle. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, drawing Penelope's gaze despite herself. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore simple range clothes, denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a well-worn leather vest. His cowboy hat shadowed his features, but even from a distance, she could sense a wildness about him that contrasted sharply with Jefferson's controlled demeanor. York Blackwood," Jefferson remarked, following her gaze with obvious disapproval. Our local cattle rancher. Competent enough with livestock, but rather lacking in social graces. You needn't concern yourself with his kind, my dear. The cowboy York secured his horse to a hitching post and turned, revealing a face bronzed by the sun and framed by dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. A several-day stubble shadowed his jaw, and when he glanced in their direction, Penelope caught a flash of intense blue eyes that seemed to cut through the distance between them. Something inexplicable passed between them in that brief moment, a recognition, perhaps, or a premonition. Penelope quickly looked away, disturbed by her own reaction. "Of course, Mr. Burke," she murmured, returning her attention to her fiancé. "I'm quite fatigued from my journey. Might we proceed to the boarding house?" Jefferson offered his arm with formal politeness. "Certainly. Mrs. Wilkins is expecting you." As they walked down the wooden sidewalk, Penelope felt a gaze upon her back and resisted the urge to turn. Something told her that York Blackwood was watching her go, and something else, something she dared not examine, made her heart beat faster at the thought. Mrs. Wilkins proved to be a cheerful, round-faced widow whose boarding house stood as a testament to cleanliness and order. The small, simple room assigned to Penelope offered a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the town's main street. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," Mrs. Wilkins informed her. "Mr. Burke asked me to see to your comfort, and I aim to do just that. You rest now, dear." Coming all the way from Boston must have been quite the ordeal. Left alone, Penelope sank onto the bed, the exhaustion of her journey finally catching up with her. She had traveled over 2,000 miles to marry a man she knew only through correspondence. Jefferson Burke seemed everything his letters had promised: respectable, established, secure. Everything she needed. So, why did her thoughts keep drifting to a pair of intense blue eyes beneath the brim of a cowboy hat? Morning brought the sounds of a town coming to life, wagon wheels on dirt streets, the distant lowing of cattle, voices calling greetings. Penelope dressed carefully in one of her better traveling dresses, a deep blue that complemented her complexion. Jefferson had promised to show her around Whispering Creek after breakfast. The town revealed itself as a growing frontier settlement, optimistic, industrious, and remarkably civilized considering its remoteness. Jefferson's general store occupied a prime location on the main street, its shelves stocked with an impressive array of goods from basic necessities to modest luxuries. "I have arrangements with suppliers as far east as Chicago," Jefferson explained as he guided her through the store. "Quality merchandise is my business philosophy. The local ranchers and farmers depend on it." "It's very impressive," Penelope said sincerely. The store represented security and prosperity, exactly what she had hoped for when accepting his proposal. "When we're married, you'll have a household account, of course," Jefferson continued. "And I've purchased the Hargrove house at the edge of town. 3 bedrooms, room to grow our family." His expression remained businesslike, but his meaning was clear. Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "That's very thoughtful." They continued their tour of the town, the church where they would be married, the schoolhouse where Jefferson served on the board, the bank where he was a principal investor. With each stop, Penelope's understanding grew. Jefferson Burke wasn't just a shopkeeper. He was one of Whispering Creek's most influential citizens. "The town council is considering my proposal to extend the rail spur directly to Whispering Creek," he explained as they walked. "It would transform our local economy. Currently, we must transport goods by wagon from Laramie, nearly 40 miles away." As Jefferson spoke of commerce and development, Penelope noticed a group of men gathered outside the livery stable. Among them stood York Blackwood, his stance relaxed yet somehow commanding. Unlike her previous glimpse of him, today she could clearly see his face, strong-featured with a straight nose, defined jawline softened by that same dark stubble, and eyes that seemed to change from blue to gray depending on how the light hit them. York was speaking to the other men, who listened with apparent respect. Whatever he said made them laugh, an easy camaraderie evident in their manner. It was a stark contrast to the formal way people interacted with Jefferson. "The cattle ranchers," Jefferson explained, noticing her attention. "They're discussing the upcoming cattle drive to Cheyenne, no doubt. A necessary but disruptive business." "Mr. Blackwood seems well respected," Penelope observed, trying to sound merely conversational. Jefferson's expression tightened slightly. "York Blackwood runs the most successful ranch in the territory, I'll grant him that. But he represents the old way of life out here, wild, unpredictable. Whispering Creek's future lies in proper development, civilization, and order." As if sensing their discussion, York looked up. His gaze found Penelope's across the street, and he touched the brim of his hat in a subtle greeting. Penelope nodded slightly in acknowledgement before looking away, aware of Jefferson's disapproving frown. "Come, my dear. The dressmaker is expecting us. Mrs. Wilkins took the liberty of sending your measurements ahead, and Miss Taylor has been working on your wedding dress." The remainder of the day passed in a whirl of wedding preparations. By evening, Penelope's head was spinning with names, faces, and expectations. Jefferson had introduced her to what seemed like half the town, all of whom regarded her with curious interest, the Eastern bride who would become Mrs. Jefferson Burke. That night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Penelope tried to focus on her good fortune. Jefferson was everything he had promised in his letters: respectable, established, forward-thinking. Their marriage would be a partnership founded on mutual benefit and respect. Romance had never been mentioned in their correspondence, and she hadn't expected it. Security, not passion, had been her goal. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, it wasn't Jefferson's properly trimmed mustache and formal manners that filled her thoughts, but a pair of intense blue eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. The next morning brought an unexpected change to her schedule. Rather than another day of introductions and wedding preparations, Jefferson appeared at breakfast with an apologetic expression. "I'm afraid I must ride to Laramie on urgent business," he explained. "A shipment of goods has been misdirected, and I must personally see to its recovery before the weekend." "I understand," Penelope assured him, though privately she felt relieved at the prospect of a day to herself. "Business must come first." "You're most understanding," Jefferson said with approval. "I've asked Mrs. Wilkins to accompany you to your final dress fitting this afternoon. I should return by tomorrow evening at the latest." After Jefferson departed, Penelope found herself with unexpected freedom. The dress fitting wasn't until 3 o'clock, leaving her morning entirely her own. On impulse, she decided to explore Whispering Creek without Jefferson's guiding commentary. The town felt different when experienced alone. Shopkeepers and townsfolk greeted her warmly, but without the deference they showed in Jefferson's presence. Penelope found herself relaxing, enjoying simple conversations without the weight of being Jefferson Burke's future wife hanging over every interaction. Her wanderings eventually led her to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. A creek, presumably the one that gave the town its name, wound through willows and cottonwoods, creating a ribbon of green against the golden grasslands. Following its course, Penelope discovered a small bridge and a pleasant spot beneath a large cottonwood tree. The peacefulness of the location drew her. Seating herself on a sun-warmed rock, Penelope removed her bonnet and closed her eyes, listening to the gentle babbling of the creek and feeling the western breeze against her face. For the first time since arriving, she felt she could breathe freely. "This spot's already taken, I'm afraid." The deep voice startled Penelope, her eyes flying open to find York Blackwood leading his chestnut horse along the creek bank. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His blue eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled, revealing a dimple in his right cheek that softened his otherwise rugged appearance. "I'm sorry," Penelope stammered, rising quickly. "I didn't realize." "I'm joking, Miss Hawthorne," York said, his smile widening. The creek doesn't belong to anyone, least of all me. Please, don't let me disturb your peace. Penelope hesitated, surprised he knew her name. You have the advantage of me, Mr. Blackwood. News travels fast in small towns, he explained, allowing his horse to drink from the creek. The arrival of Jefferson Burke's Eastern bride was the talk of Whispering Creek before your stagecoach even arrived. Something in his tone when mentioning Jefferson made Penelope study him more carefully. You don't approve of Mr. Burke? York's expression turned thoughtful. Jefferson and I have different visions for this territory, that's all. He sees progress in railroads and development. I see it in preserving what makes this land special. He glanced at her. But that's hardly proper conversation for our first meeting. Despite herself, Penelope smiled. Perhaps I'm tired of proper conversation, Mr. Blackwood. I've had little else since arriving. York laughed, a rich sound that seemed to fit perfectly with the rustling leaves and flowing water around them. Then by all means, let's be improper. What brings you all the way from Boston to marry a man you've never met, Miss Hawthorne? The directness of the question should have offended her, but somehow, in this peaceful spot away from town, honesty felt easier than pretense. Necessity, Mr. Blackwood. My parents died last year, leaving me with few options. Mr. Burke's advertisement promised security and respectability, but not love. The question was gentle, without judgment. Penelope looked away, watching the creek's waters flow over smooth stones. Love is a luxury many women can't afford. Security is more reliable. York was quiet for a moment, leading his horse a few steps away to graze on the lush grass. Out here, we learn to rely on both practical considerations and our instincts, Miss Hawthorne. One without the other leaves a person vulnerable. And what do your instincts tell you about me, Mr. Blackwood? The question slipped out before Penelope could consider its propriety. York studied her, those blue eyes seeming to see far more than she was comfortable revealing. That you're braver than you give yourself credit for. That you're used to putting others' expectations before your own. And that you haven't really smiled in a very long time. The accuracy of his assessment left Penelope momentarily speechless. You've deduced all that from our brief acquaintance. I make my living reading signs others miss, York said simply. Tracks in the dirt, changes in the wind, a horse's ears flicking before anyone else hears the rider coming. He smiled again, gentler this time. People leave signs too, if you know how to look. The conversation was dangerous, too personal, too perceptive. Penelope retrieved her bonnet, suddenly aware of how improper this meeting might appear to others. I should return to town. Mrs. Wilkins will be waiting for me. York nodded, making no move to stop her. The wedding's on Sunday? Yes. Then, I wish you happiness, Miss Hawthorne. I hope Jefferson Burke is the man you're looking for. Something in his tone made Penelope pause. And what kind of man do you think I'm looking for, Mr. Blackwood? York considered her question seriously. One who sees who you really are, not just who he wants you to be. He touched the brim of his hat. Good day, Miss Hawthorne. As Penelope walked back toward town, she found herself unsettled by the encounter. York Blackwood represented everything she hadn't come west to find: wildness, unpredictability, emotion rather than practicality. Yet she couldn't deny the connection she'd felt during their brief conversation, a sense that he somehow understood parts of her that she barely acknowledged herself. Her dress fitting that afternoon provided a welcome distraction. Miss Taylor, the dressmaker, had created a gown of ivory silk with modest lace trim, elegant, respectable, and perfectly suitable for becoming Mrs. Jefferson Burke. You look beautiful, dear, Mrs. Wilkins enthused as Penelope stood before the mirror. Mr. Burke will be most pleased. Penelope studied her reflection, trying to see herself through Jefferson's eyes. Would he be pleased? Would he look at her with admiration? Desire? Or would she simply fulfill a practical role in his well-ordered life, as he would in hers? That evening at dinner, Mrs. Wilkins regaled the other boarders with stories of her 30 years in Wyoming Territory. When my late husband and I first arrived, Whispering Creek was nothing but a trading post and a few tents. Indians still camped along the creek in those days. Indians? Penelope asked, her curiosity piqued. Are there still native people in the area? The Cheyenne and Arapaho were moved to reservations some years back, Mrs. Wilkins explained, though York Blackwood still trades with them sometimes. Has some unusual notions about respecting their ways, that one. Mr. Blackwood seems different from most men in town, Penelope observed, trying to sound merely conversational. Mrs. Wilkins chuckled. That he is. Came west as a boy, I heard tell. Learned ranching from the ground up, worked as a cowhand until he saved enough to buy his own spread. Now the Flying Bee is one of the largest ranches in the territory. Flying Bee? His brand looks like a bee with wings. Started with nothing but his own 2 hands and a few head of cattle. Now he employs half a dozen men year-round and more during roundup season. Mrs. Wilkins lowered her voice conspiratorially. Half the unmarried women in 3 counties have set their caps for him, but he seems determined to remain a bachelor. A confirmed bachelor, then? Penelope asked, ignoring the inexplicable twist in her stomach at the thought. So it would seem, though Sarah Jenkins at the cafe swears he's just waiting for the right woman. Mrs. Wilkins winked. Not that any of this should interest you, with your wedding just days away. Of course not, Penelope agreed quickly. I was merely curious about the local personalities. That night, sleep eluded Penelope. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying her conversation with York by the creek. His observations about her had been uncomfortably perceptive, seeing past the composed exterior she presented to the world. And his parting words continued to haunt her. One who sees who you really are, not just who he wants you to be. Did Jefferson see who she really was? Did she even know herself anymore? Dawn found her still awake, watching the first gray light filter through her window. On impulse, Penelope dressed and slipped quietly from the boarding house. The town was mostly silent, with only a few early risers beginning their day. She made her way back to the creek, drawn to the peaceful spot where she'd encountered York. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sage and dew-dampened grass. Penelope seated herself on the same rock as before, watching the first rays of sunlight glint off the flowing water. Here, away from expectations and preparations, she could think clearly. Jefferson would return by evening. The wedding was less than 3 days away. Once married, she would become Mrs. Burke, mistress of a fine house, wife of a prominent businessman. It was exactly what she had traveled west to find. So, why did the prospect fill her with such uncertainty? You're out early. Penelope didn't need to turn to recognize York's voice. Somehow, she'd half expected to find him here again. I couldn't sleep. York moved to stand beside her rock, his gaze following hers to the creek. Wedding jitters? Is it normal to question such a momentous decision? The question emerged more vulnerable than she'd intended. I'd say it's normal to question any decision that changes your life forever, York replied, especially one made from a distance of 2,000 miles. Penelope sighed, watching a pair of birds chase each other above the creek. I don't know Jefferson, not really. His letters were informative, but revealed little of the man himself. And now that you've met him? He's exactly as he presented himself: successful, respectable, proper. York studied her profile. But I don't know if that's enough. Once spoken, the doubt couldn't be recalled. Is it unreasonable to want more than security from marriage? York considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. My parents had a love match unusual for their time and place. My father was a surveyor, my mother the daughter of a Boston merchant who'd come west to teach school. They had nothing but a cabin and each other, but I never saw two people more content. The mention of his parents surprised Penelope. What happened to them? Cholera, when I was 14. His voice held old grief, long accepted. I've been on my own since then. I'm sorry, Penelope said softly. My parents died of influenza last year. Sometimes I still expect to see them when I enter a room. York nodded in understanding. The feeling fades but never quite disappears. He hesitated before continuing. After they died, I worked ranch jobs, sleeping in bunkhouses, following the herds. Saved every penny until I could buy my own land. Now I have more than I ever dreamed possible as that orphaned boy. You've built an impressive life, Penelope acknowledged. A solitary one, York corrected. I've focused on building something lasting, something that might outlive me. But lately. He trailed off, looking toward the distant mountains. Lately? Penelope prompted. York's blue eyes returned to hers, unexpectedly vulnerable. Lately I've been wondering if success means anything without someone to share it with. Not just any woman, though. The right one. The intensity of his gaze made Penelope's heart race. This conversation had strayed far beyond propriety, yet she couldn't bring herself to end it. How does one recognize the right person? I think when it happens, you just know. York smiled slightly. At least, that's what my father always said about meeting my mother. A church bell tolled in the distance, breaking the spell between them. Penelope started, suddenly aware of how long she'd been away from the boarding house. I should go. Mrs. Wilkins will worry. York stepped back, giving her space to rise. Miss Hawthorne Penelope. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. Whatever you decide about Sunday, know that you have choices. There's more than one path to security, and happiness shouldn't be sacrificed for it. The implication of his words was clear, though he'd been careful not to speak it directly. Penelope gathered her courage to ask the question burning in her mind. Are you suggesting I break my engagement to Jefferson? York met her gaze steadily. I'm suggesting you listen to your heart as well as your head. Jefferson Burke is a good businessman, but marriage isn't a business transaction, or it shouldn't be. And what of my reputation? My prospects? If I jilted Jefferson at the altar, you wouldn't be destitute, York interrupted. Whispering Creek needs a schoolteacher. The position comes with a small house behind the schoolhouse. It's not luxury, but it's independence. Penelope stared at him, stunned by the unexpected suggestion. You've given this considerable thought, Mr. Blackwood. A faint flush colored his tanned cheeks. Perhaps I have. Why would you concern yourself with my situation? York took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. Because from the moment I saw you step down from that stagecoach, something changed. I can't explain it, but I felt. He struggled for words. I felt like I was seeing something I'd been waiting for without realizing it. The raw honesty of his confession left Penelope speechless. No one had ever spoken to her with such openness, such vulnerability. I'm not asking anything of you, York continued quickly. I have no right. I just want you to know that marrying Jefferson isn't your only option. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Before Penelope could formulate a response, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders appeared along the creek trail, and with a sinking heart, Penelope recognized Jefferson Burke at their lead. Jefferson reined in his horse sharply at the sight of them, his expression darkening. Penelope, what are you doing out here? And with Blackwood, of all people? York stepped forward, his posture relaxed but alert. Miss Hawthorne was enjoying the morning air, Burke. I happened upon her by chance. Jefferson dismounted, his movements stiff, with barely controlled anger. A likely story. What will people think, seeing my fiancé alone with another man days before our wedding? We've done nothing improper, Penelope protested, though the denial felt hollow even to her own ears. They may not have touched, but their conversation had been far more intimate than any she'd shared with Jefferson. Return to town immediately, Jefferson ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Mrs. Wilkins is searching for you. We'll discuss this later, in private. The command, issued as if to a wayward child, sparked an unexpected flame of rebellion in Penelope. I'm not accustomed to being ordered about, Mr. Burke. Jefferson's expression registered surprise before hardening again. Perhaps you should become accustomed to it, as my future wife. York took a step forward, his easy manner replaced by a controlled tension. That's no way to speak to a lady, Burke. This is between me and my fiancé, Blackwood. I suggest you remember your place. And I suggest you remember yours, York countered, his voice low but carrying. Miss Hawthorne isn't your possession. Jefferson's companions, two men Penelope recognized as business associates from town, exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue to town, Jefferson. This is hardly the place. I agree, Penelope interrupted, gathering her dignity. I'll return to the boarding house immediately. Good day, gentlemen. Mr. Blackwood. She nodded to York, trying to convey with her eyes what she couldn't say aloud. Jefferson mounted his horse again, clearly intending to escort her back. As they rode away, Penelope couldn't resist glancing back. York stood where they'd left him, watching her go, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. The confrontation with Jefferson, when it came, was every bit as unpleasant as Penelope had anticipated. In the privacy of Mrs. Wilkins' parlor, his controlled facade cracked to reveal a man unaccustomed to having his authority questioned. What were you thinking, Penelope? Meeting a man like Blackwood in secret? Do you have any idea what damage this could do to my reputation? To yours? It wasn't a secret meeting, Penelope defended herself. As I've explained, I went for a morning walk and encountered Mr. Blackwood by chance. Jefferson paced the small room, his usual composure noticeably absent. Blackwood has opposed my business interests at every turn. He rallies the ranchers against progress, against the very developments that would bring prosperity to this town. And now he targets my personal life as well. I hardly think Mr. Blackwood sees me as a way to thwart your business interests, Penelope said, unable to keep a note of sarcasm from her voice. Jefferson stopped pacing to stare at her. You defend him? After he deliberately compromised your reputation? He did nothing of the sort. We were having a conversation in broad daylight, in full view of anyone who passed by. Penelope took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Jefferson, I think perhaps we should discuss our expectations for marriage. Your reaction today suggests you anticipate a level of obedience I wasn't aware was required. Required? Jefferson repeated, his brow furrowing. Penelope, a wife naturally follows her husband's guidance. That's the natural order of things. Guidance, yes. But not commands issued as if to a servant. Jefferson seemed genuinely puzzled by her objection. I apologize if my tone was harsh. The sight of you, with Blackwood. It upset me more than I expected. His expression softened slightly. I've worked hard to build my position in this community, Penelope. When I advertised for a wife, I sought a partner who would enhance that position, not undermine it. Is that all I represent to you? An enhancement to your social standing? Jefferson sighed, seating himself across from her. Of course not. I selected you from among dozens of respondents because your letters showed intelligence, practicality, and good breeding. I believe we can build a successful partnership based on mutual respect and common goals. And affection? What of that? A flicker of discomfort crossed Jefferson's face. Affection grows with time and shared purpose, Penelope. I'm not a romantic man, as I believe my letters made clear. I offer security, respectability, and a comfortable life. If you expected passionate declarations, I fear you've misunderstood the nature of our arrangement. His honesty, at least, was refreshing. Penelope studied the man she had agreed to marry, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Jefferson Burke was exactly who he claimed to be, a practical businessman approaching marriage as he would any other venture, with clear expectations and defined benefits. "The wedding is in 2 days," Jefferson continued. "Mrs. Wilkins tells me your dress is ready, and Reverend Thompson has prepared the ceremony. The entire town will attend." He reached across to take her hand. "I believe we can be very comfortable together, Penelope, if you'll trust my judgment and direction." Penelope allowed her hand to remain in his, noting with detached interest that his touch provoked none of the awareness she'd felt merely standing near York Blackwood. "I need time to think, Jefferson. Today has raised questions I hadn't considered before." A flash of alarm crossed Jefferson's face. "You're not reconsidering our arrangement, surely?" "After all the preparations, the announcements, I'm not making any decisions now," Penelope assured him, withdrawing her hand. "But I believe we both deserve certainty before proceeding with something as permanent as marriage." Jefferson stood, visibly struggling to regain his composure. "Very well. Take today to rest and reflect. I'm confident you'll recognize the wisdom of our match." At the door, he paused. "And, Penelope, I would consider it a personal favor if you would avoid further interactions with York Blackwood. The man has a talent for disruption I'd prefer to keep away from my household." After he left, Penelope remained in the parlor, her thoughts in turmoil. Everything Jefferson said made perfect sense. Their marriage would indeed provide everything she had sought when responding to his advertisement: security, respectability, a defined role in a growing community. Yet York's words echoed in her mind. Marriage isn't a business transaction, or it shouldn't be. That night, Penelope wrote 2 letters. The first, to her childhood friend Emma in Boston, explaining her situation and asking if the need arose whether Emma's family might welcome her back until she found employment. The second letter was harder to write, and Penelope crumpled several attempts before achieving a version that satisfied her. Morning brought no clarity, only the growing weight of decision. Penelope posted her letters and spent the day assisting with final wedding preparations, smiling and nodding in all the right places while her mind raced with alternatives and consequences. By evening, the entire town buzzed with anticipation for the wedding. Jefferson hosted a small dinner for close friends and business associates, making no mention of their earlier disagreement. To all appearances, they were a well-matched couple on the eve of their union. Only Penelope knew of her inner turmoil, and perhaps York Blackwood, who was conspicuously absent from town that day. Her wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. Mrs. Wilkins bustled about, helping Penelope with her hair and dress, chattering excitedly about the celebration to follow the ceremony. "Half the county will be at the church," she enthused, pinning a small cluster of wildflowers to Penelope's carefully arranged hair. "And Jefferson has arranged quite a feast at the hotel afterward. You're marrying well, my dear." Penelope studied her reflection in the small mirror, barely recognizing the composed bride who looked back at her. "Mrs. Wilkins, did you marry for love or practicality?" The older woman's hands stilled in their work. "Both, I suppose. Thomas was a good, steady man. Not one for grand gestures or poetic words, but he built us a good life." She smiled at the memory. "We grew to love each other deeply over the years. Sometimes the quietest loves run the deepest, you know." "And if you had to choose again, would you choose the same path?" Mrs. Wilkins met Penelope's gaze in the mirror. "Every marriage is a gamble, dear. You never truly know what you're getting until you're in the thick of it. But I will say this life out here is hard enough with someone you care for. I can't imagine facing it with someone you don't." The simple wisdom of her words struck Penelope deeply. Before she could respond, a knock at the front door announced the arrival of the carriage that would take her to the church. The small white church was indeed filled to capacity, fragrant with wildflowers and buzzing with anticipatory conversation. Penelope waited in the vestibule, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain Everyone must hear it. Through the partially open door, she could see Jefferson standing at the altar, immaculate in his best suit, the picture of a successful businessman about to add a suitable wife to his accomplishments. Reverend Thompson approached, prayer book in hand. "Are you ready, my dear? It's time." Penelope took a deep breath, searching for certainty and finding only questions. "Reverend, is it very wicked to have doubts on one's wedding day?" The kind-faced minister smiled gently. "Many brides experience nervousness, Miss Hawthorne. It's perfectly natural." "This is more than nervousness," Penelope admitted. "I'm questioning whether this marriage is right for either of us." Reverend Thompson's expression grew serious. "That is indeed a weightier matter. Would you like a moment to pray for guidance?" "I don't think prayer will resolve this, Reverend. I need to speak with Jefferson. Privately, before the ceremony." The minister hesitated, clearly conflicted between protocol and pastoral concern. "That's most unusual, but wait here." Minutes later, Jefferson appeared in the vestibule, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Penelope? What's the meaning of this? Everyone is waiting." "I needed to speak with you first," Penelope said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Away from witnesses and expectations." Jefferson glanced around, confirming they were temporarily alone. "What is it?" "I can't marry you." The words, once spoken, brought an unexpected sense of relief.
"I'm sorry, Jefferson."
"You're an honorable man offering exactly what you promised. But I've realized it's not what I need." Jefferson's face flushed with anger. "This is Blackwood's doing, isn't it? He's filled your head with nonsense. This has nothing to do with Mr. Blackwood," Penelope interrupted, though the lie tasted bitter. "It's about us. You want a wife who will follow your lead without question, who will enhance your position in the community. I thought I could be that woman, but I can't. Not without sacrificing parts of myself I'm not willing to lose. You realize what this means?" Jefferson's voice was cold now. "Your reputation will be ruined. No decent man in the territory will have you after this public humiliation." "Perhaps. But I'd rather face uncertainty than commit to a lifetime of compromise neither of us deserves." Penelope removed her engagement ring, a modest band Jefferson had presented upon her arrival, and placed it in his palm. "I wish you happiness, Jefferson."
"I truly do."
"With a woman who can be what you need." For a moment, something like genuine hurt flashed in Jefferson's eyes, surprising Penelope with its intensity. Then his expression hardened, the businessman replacing the spurned groom. "I'll inform the guests. I suggest you make yourself scarce, Penelope. The sympathy of Whispering Creek will not be with you in this matter." As Jefferson strode back into the church, Penelope slipped through the vestibule's side door into the bright sunshine. She had no plan beyond escaping the immediate situation, no idea where to go or what to do next. Her luggage remained at the boarding house, but she couldn't face Mrs. Wilkins' disappointment or the curious stares of the other boarders. Almost without conscious decision, her feet carried her toward the creek, to the peaceful spot that had become her refuge during these tumultuous days. The absurdity of her situation, a runaway bride in her wedding dress, with no destination and no future, might have made her laugh if the circumstances weren't so dire. The creek babbled as peacefully as ever, indifferent to human dramas. Penelope sank onto her usual rock, heedless of her fine dress, and finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back to fall. Not tears of regret, exactly, but of release, the overwhelming emotion of closing one door without knowing what lay behind the next. "I thought I might find you here." York's voice was gentle, without surprise or judgment. Penelope looked up to find him standing a few paces away, leading his horse. He wore his usual range clothes rather than Sunday best, suggesting he'd never intended to attend the wedding. "How did you know?" Penelope asked, hastily wiping her tears. "Mrs. Wilkins' boy came tearing out to my ranch with a note." York approached slowly, as if afraid She might flee. Said you'd left this for me. He held out the letter she'd written 2 nights before, the one she'd entrusted to young Tommy Wilkins with instructions to deliver it only if she didn't go through with the wedding. You read it then? Penelope asked, suddenly shy. York nodded, his blue eyes warm. Every word.
Did you mean it?
Penelope took a deep breath.
Yes.
All of it. The letter had been simple but direct. If you receive this, I've found the courage to follow my heart rather than mere practicality. I make no assumptions about your feelings, but if the connection I sense between us was real, I would welcome the chance to explore it not as a desperate alternative to a loveless marriage, but as its own beginning. York moved closer, until he stood directly before her. I've built my life around self-reliance, Penelope. Never needed anyone, never wanted complications. Then you stepped off that stagecoach, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about myself came into question. We barely know each other, Penelope said, though her heart raced at his proximity. True, York acknowledged with a slight smile. But I'd like the chance to change that. No expectations, no pressure. Just 2 people discovering if what they sense might grow into something real. I have nothing now, Penelope reminded him. No position, no security. The entire town probably thinks I've lost my mind. York's smile widened. Then we're well matched, because most of them have thought that about me for years. He sobered slightly. I meant what I said about the teaching position. Whispering Creek needs a schoolteacher, and once the gossip dies down, they'll care more about your qualifications than your broken engagement. And us? What would people think? I'm more concerned with what you think, York said simply. I'm offering friendship, Penelope. Companionship with no strings attached. Whatever grows between us will develop at its own pace, in its own time. The freedom of his offer, so different from Jefferson's precisely defined expectations, filled Penelope with unexpected hope. I've never been very good at living without a plan. Out here, plans change with the weather, York said with a chuckle. We learn to adapt. He held out his hand. Come with me. I know a place where you can rest and think, away from town gossip. Tomorrow will be soon enough to face practical matters. Penelope hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. York's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and the simple contact sent a current of awareness through her that confirmed she'd made the right choice, however uncertain the future might be. The place York had mentioned proved to be a small cabin nestled in a grove of cottonwoods about 2 miles from town, overlooking a bend in the creek where the water pooled deep and clear. My first home when I bought the ranch, York explained as he helped her down from his horse. Now it's mostly used during roundup when we need extra hands, or when I need quiet away from the main house. The cabin was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom visible through an open door, and a covered porch facing the water. Someone had recently been there. The cabin was clean, with fresh linens on the bed and a vase of wildflowers on the rough-hewn table. You were very confident I wouldn't go through with the wedding, Penelope observed, noting the preparations. York had the grace to look slightly abashed. Not confident. Hopeful, maybe. I asked my housekeeper to ready the cabin, just in case. He busied himself lighting the stove. You can stay here as long as you need, while you decide your next steps. The main ranch house is about a mile north, but no one will disturb you here. The thoughtfulness of the arrangement touched Penelope deeply. Thank you. For understanding, for not judging. We've all made choices we've reconsidered, York said simply. The measure of character isn't never making mistakes, it's having the courage to correct them. As sunset painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat on the porch, sharing a simple meal York had packed in his saddlebags. The conversation flowed easily between them, ranging from childhood memories to favorite books to York's amusing stories of ranch life. The first winter I owned this place, I was so determined to prove myself that I refused help from neighboring ranchers, York recalled with a self-deprecating smile. Nearly lost half my cattle in a blizzard before old Sam Carpenter rode over with 3 of his hands to help me dig out the herd. Taught me that independence has its limits, especially out here. It's difficult to accept help when you've prided yourself on self-reliance, Penelope agreed. After my parents died, I was so determined to manage alone that I exhausted our remaining funds rather than ask family friends for assistance. Which led you to Jefferson's advertisement, York observed. Penelope nodded. It seemed the perfect solution at the time. Security, without obligation to people who knew me before, who would see my situation as tragic. And now? What do you want now, Penelope? The directness of the question demanded equal honesty. I want to stand on my own, to discover who I am without the constraints of others' expectations. And then, perhaps. She hesitated, gathering her courage. Perhaps to explore what might exist between 2 people who see each other clearly, who connect not from necessity, but from genuine feeling. York's blue eyes darkened as he held her gaze. I'd like that very much. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Penelope. True to his word, York gave her space to find her footing, visiting the cabin daily but never presuming, never pushing. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests and respectful disagreements, building a foundation of genuine friendship. A week after her non-wedding, Penelope ventured into town, had held high despite the whispers and stares. The school board, despite initial reservations, was sufficiently impressed by her Boston education to offer her the teaching position for the fall term, set to begin in just 2 weeks. It's not much, the board chairman warned her. $18 a month, plus the cottage behind the schoolhouse. Most of our previous teachers have been unmarried women who moved on once they found husbands. The arrangement suits me perfectly, Penelope assured him, ignoring his pointed reference to her unmarried state. Jefferson Burke avoided her entirely, a relief given the circumstances. Mrs. Wilkins, after an initial period of scandalized disapproval, gradually warmed again, especially once Penelope moved from York's cabin to the small teacher's cottage and began establishing herself as Whispering Creek's educator. The cottage was tiny but sufficient, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, simply furnished but clean. Penelope took satisfaction in making it her own, creating the first home that truly belonged to her alone. As summer gave way to autumn, Penelope found unexpected fulfillment in teaching Whispering Creek's children. From the youngest at 6 to teenagers preparing for adult responsibilities, her students responded to her genuine interest in their progress. Even the most skeptical parents were gradually won over by their children's enthusiasm. Throughout these transitional weeks, York remained a steadfast presence in her life. He respected the careful distance Penelope maintained in public, understanding the precariousness of her position as an unmarried woman who had jilted the town's leading businessman. But privately, their connection deepened with each conversation, each shared experience. The children mentioned you've been teaching them about the stars, York commented one evening as they walked along the creek path. The early October air carried a hint of the coming winter, and Penelope had wrapped a woolen shawl around her shoulders. They're fascinated by the night sky, Penelope explained. Most had never considered that stars have names and patterns. Tomorrow we'll discuss the Greek myths behind the constellations. York smiled, the expression transforming his rugged features in a way that still made Penelope's heart beat faster. You've found your calling, it seems. I enjoy it more than I expected, she admitted. There's something deeply satisfying about opening young minds to new ideas. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the setting sun painting the landscape in amber hues. When they reached the small bridge near town, York paused. The harvest dance is Saturday, he said, his tone deliberately casual. I was wondering if you might consider attending. With me. The annual harvest dance was Whispering Creek's most significant social event before winter set in. Accepting York's invitation would make a public statement about their relationship that couldn't be misinterpreted. Are you certain? Penelope asked. There will be talk. York's expression grew serious. Let them talk. We've done nothing wrong, Penelope. You chose not to marry a man you didn't love. I befriended a woman I admire greatly. If Whispering Creek can't accept that, perhaps it's not as civilized as Jefferson Burke claims. Penelope laughed despite herself. You're a terrible influence, York Blackwood. So, I've been told. His smile returned, along with that devastating dimple. Is that a yes? Yes, Penelope said simply. I'd be honored to attend with you. The night of the harvest dance arrived clear and cool, with a full moon illuminating the landscape in silver light. Penelope wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her coloring far better than her abandoned wedding gown had, and arranged her hair in a simpler style than Boston fashion dictated, but one that suited her new life. York arrived at her cottage precisely on time, his tall frame unaccustomed to formal wear but striking nonetheless in a clean black suit and crisp white shirt. He stared at Penelope for a long moment before finding his voice. You look beautiful, he said finally, the simple words carrying more weight than elaborate compliments. As do you, Penelope returned, enjoying the slight flush that colored his cheeks. Very handsome indeed. The dance was held in the town hall, decorated with autumn leaves, corn shocks, and paper lanterns. As York escorted Penelope inside, conversations faltered and heads turned. She held her head high, drawing strength from York's solid presence beside her. Jefferson Burke was there, of course, with the recently arrived widow of a Denver businessman conspicuously at his side. He acknowledged their entrance with a stiff nod before deliberately turning away. Well, that wasn't so terrible, York murmured close to Penelope's ear, his breath warm against her skin. Before she could respond, they were approached by several of York's ranching friends and their wives, who greeted Penelope with genuine warmth. The awkward moment passed, and gradually the other attendees returned to their conversations. The local musician struck up a lively reel, and York raised an eyebrow in question. Shall we? Dancing with York proved to be a revelation. Despite his imposing size, he moved with natural grace, guiding Penelope through the figures with confident ease. His hand at her waist was respectful but warm, his blue eyes never leaving hers as they circled the floor. You dance beautifully, Penelope said, slightly breathless, as the music ended. My mother insisted I learn, York admitted with a smile. Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo. The evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and gradually warming acceptance from the townspeople. Not everyone approved. Certainly Penelope noted several matrons watching disapprovingly, but enough friendly faces surrounded them to make the night enjoyable. When the musicians began a waltz, York drew Penelope closer than the previous dances had required. Is this all right? He asked softly. More than all right, Penelope assured him, her hand resting on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength beneath the unfamiliar suit. As they moved together to the music, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. York's gaze held hers, conveying feelings neither had yet put into words, but both increasingly acknowledged. I've been thinking, York said, his deep voice pitched for her ears alone, about what you said that day by the creek, about wanting more than security for marriage. Penelope's heart quickened. Yes, I think perhaps I've been guilty of the same limited thinking as Jefferson, in my own way. York guided her through a turn before continuing. I've focused on building my ranch, accumulating land and cattle, measuring success in practical terms. But lately I've realized how empty that success would be without someone to share it. Someone, Penelope prompted, needing to hear him say it. York's hand tightened slightly at her waist. You, Penelope. Only you. The music ended, but they remained motionless amid the swirl of other dancers, locked in a moment of perfect understanding. Perhaps, Penelope suggested, her voice barely steady, We might continue this conversation somewhere more private. The night air felt cool after the warmth of the dance hall. York led Penelope toward the creek, to the bridge that had become their unofficial meeting place. The full moon silvered the landscape, turning the flowing water into a ribbon of light. "I meant what I said inside," York said, facing her with characteristic directness. "These past months, getting to know you, watching you build your own life here, it's changed how I see everything. Changed what I want." "And what do you want, York?" Penelope asked softly. He took her hands in his touch sending that now familiar current of awareness through her. "I want a partnership, Penelope. Not based on convenience or practicality, though those have their place, but based on something deeper. Something that makes ordinary days extraordinary, just because we're facing them together." The simple eloquence of his words moved her deeply. "Are you proposing, York Blackwood?" A smile touched his lips. "Not exactly. Not yet." His thumb traced circles on her palm, a distractingly intimate gesture. "I'm suggesting we acknowledge what's growing between us. That we give ourselves permission to explore it fully, without the constraints we've maintained out of respect for your situation." "And if it leads to a proposal?" Penelope pressed, needing certainty. "Then it would be offered with my whole heart, and with the understanding that you'd be gaining a partner, not a master." York's blue eyes held hers steadily. "I don't want a wife who follows blindly, Penelope. I want one who walks beside me, who challenges me when I'm wrong, who makes me better than I could be alone." Something tight and fearful that had lived in Penelope's chest since her parents' deaths, perhaps even before, began to loosen at his words. "I think I could be that woman." "I know you could," York said simply. "You already are." He stepped closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "May I kiss you, Penelope? I've been wanting to since that first day by the creek." In answer, Penelope rose on tiptoes, closing the distance between them. York's lips met hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as months of restrained feeling found expression. His arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his body, and Penelope wound her arms around his neck, giving herself fully to the moment. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, York rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it. I'm glad I found you, even if I came looking for someone else entirely," Penelope whispered, a smile touching her lips. The winter of 1876-77 proved to be one of the harshest in Wyoming Territory's recorded history. Heavy snows isolated Whispering Creek for weeks at a time, turning the small settlement inward for survival and entertainment. The schoolhouse became a center of community life, with Penelope organizing reading circles for adults as well as children. Through blizzards and bitter cold, York made the journey from his ranch to town regularly, sometimes staying overnight at the hotel when weather threatened. Their courtship progressed in full view of the community, conducted with propriety but growing affection that few could deny seemed genuine. By spring thaw, even the most scandalized matrons had grudgingly accepted that the schoolteacher and the rancher were an established couple. Jefferson Burke, having announced his engagement to the Denver widow, maintained a cool distance but no longer actively snubbed them in public. "He's not a bad man," Penelope observed one April afternoon as she and York planted a vegetable garden behind her cottage. "Just different from what I need." York looked up from the furrow he was digging. "That's generous of you, considering how he treated you after the wedding that wasn't." Penelope shrugged, dropping bean seeds into the prepared soil. "He was hurt and embarrassed. I can understand that, even if I don't regret my decision." York straightened, wiping his brow with his sleeve.
"And do you?"
"Regret it, I mean?" Penelope set aside her seed packet and moved to him, unconcerned about the dirt on both their hands. "Not for a single moment. Everything that's happened since teaching, making my own way, finding my place here, it's been exactly what I needed." She smiled up at him. Finding you was the unexpected gift in all of it. York pulled her close, heedless of their earthly state. I've been thinking about the future, Penelope. Have you now? She teased, though her heart quickened at his serious tone. The ranch is doing well. The new breeding stock I brought in last fall should improve the herd considerably. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, his usual directness faltering. I've been adding on to the main house. A proper library with big windows. Thought you might like that for your books. Penelope's breath caught. York Blackwood, are you asking me something? He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest against her ear. Doing a poor job of it, apparently. Stepping back, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I had this made in Cheyenne. Wanted it to be special, not something from Burke's store. Opening the box revealed a ring unlike any Penelope had seen, a band of gold, supporting not a traditional diamond, but a perfect oval sapphire surrounded by tiny pearls. Blue for the Wyoming sky, York explained softly. Pearls for the woman who is precious beyond measure. Tears filled Penelope's eyes as York took her soil-streaked hand in his equally dirty one. The moment was nothing like the formal proposal Jefferson had made upon her arrival. It was better, more real, perfectly them. I love you, Penelope Hawthorne, York said simply. Not for what you can bring to my life, but for who you are. I want to build a future with you, a partnership, a family, a legacy of love like my parents had. Will you marry me? Yes, Penelope whispered, her voice stronger as she repeated, Yes, York. I will marry you. The ring slid onto her finger, slightly loose over her gardening roughened knuckles, but perfectly right. York lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it dirt and all, before capturing her mouth in a kiss that promised a lifetime of passion and partnership. They were married in June of 1877, not in Whispering Creek's church, but under the open sky beside the creek where they had first truly connected. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony, his initial reservations about the couple long since overcome by the evident depth of their commitment. The entire community attended, even Jefferson Burke and his new wife, their presence a tacit acknowledgement that life in a frontier town required moving beyond past grievances. Mrs. Wilkins cried openly, having appointed herself Penelope's surrogate mother for the occasion. Penelope wore a simple dress of pale blue silk that matched her sapphire ring, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. York, resplendent in a new suit that couldn't quite tame his essential ruggedness, watched her approach with undisguised wonder. Their vows were brief but heartfelt, promises of partnership and fidelity spoken with absolute conviction. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, York's kiss left no doubt about the passion that underlay their practical partnership. The celebration continued well into the night, with music and dancing, abundant food, and flowing drink. As twilight deepened, York led his bride to a waiting buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers by his ranch hands. Ready to go home, Mrs. Blackwood? He asked, his voice husky with emotion and anticipation. Penelope looked up at the man she had never expected to find, the man who had shown her that security and love weren't opposing choices, but complementary gifts. I've been ready since the moment I met you, Mr. Blackwood. I just didn't know it yet. The ranch house welcomed them with lamplight and privacy, the ranch hands having tactfully made themselves scarce for the night. York carried Penelope across the threshold in the traditional manner, but set her down in the entrance hall with untypical hesitation. I've dreamed of bringing you home as my wife, he admitted, suddenly boyish in his vulnerability. But I find myself nervous now that the moment's here. Penelope reached up to touch his face, loving him all the more for his honesty. We have all the time in the world, York. Tonight, and all the nights to come. Their first joining as husband and wife was everything Penelope had secretly hoped for, tender and passionate, considerate and consuming. York's strength was matched by his gentleness, his experience tempered by his reverence for her trust. In his arms, Penelope discovered aspects of herself she'd never known existed, a capacity for pleasure and giving that transformed the physical act into something transcendent. Afterward, lying together in the moonlight that streamed through the bedroom window, Penelope traced lazy patterns on York's chest. "Did you really add a library to the house for me?" York's chuckle vibrated beneath her cheek. "See for yourself." He lit a lamp and, both of them wrapped in bedsheets like impromptu robes, led her down the hallway to a room she hadn't noticed earlier. Opening the door revealed a spacious room lined with empty bookshelves, dominated by a large bay window that would capture the morning light. A comfortable reading chair sat beside the window, with a smaller writing desk nearby. "It's perfect," Penelope breathed, taking in the loving detail of the space. "Absolutely perfect." "Like its mistress," York said, drawing her back against his chest, his arms encircling her from behind. "I want you to be happy here, Penelope. To make this ranch your home in every way." Penelope turned in his arms, the sheet slipping from her shoulder in a way that immediately darkened York's eyes with renewed desire. "Home isn't about the place, York. It's about the person. You're my home now." He lifted her then, sheets and all, carrying her back to their bedroom with renewed purpose. "And you are mine, Penelope Blackwood. Now and always." The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The harsh Wyoming winters, the uncertainties of the cattle market, the isolation of ranch life all tested the partnership York and Penelope had forged. But the foundation they had built proved stronger than any difficulty. Penelope continued teaching in Whispering Creek for 2 years, until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Victoria after York's mother, made the daily journey to town impractical. Instead, she turned the ranch's library into a classroom for Victoria and the children of the ranch hands, creating a small but thriving school that gained fame throughout the territory. York's innovative breeding and business practices expanded the Flying Bee into one of Wyoming's most successful ranches. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he embraced new techniques while maintaining his commitment to treating the land with respect, a balance that ensured prosperity while preserving the wild beauty that had first drawn him to ranching life. 2 more children joined their family: James, named for Penelope's father, and Elizabeth, who arrived as a surprise blessing when Victoria was already 12. Their home rang with laughter, learning, and love, creating the legacy York had spoken of on the day he proposed. 10 years after their wedding, York and Penelope stood together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Victoria and James played with the ranch dogs in the yard, their voices carrying clearly in the evening air. Baby Elizabeth slept peacefully in Penelope's arms, her tiny features a perfect blend of both parents. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd gone through with it?" York asked suddenly. "If you'd married Burke that day?" Penelope considered the question seriously, as she did all of York's questions. "Sometimes. I imagine we would have had a perfectly adequate life together. Comfortable, respectable, perhaps even contented in a quiet way." She looked up at her husband, taking in the face that had become as essential to her as her own reflection. "But I would never have known this kind of happiness. This completeness." York's arm tightened around her shoulders. "When you stepped off that stagecoach, you were looking for security, for a life without risk. And found a love without conditions instead," Penelope finished, leaning into his embrace. "The best kind of security, as it turns out." York bent to kiss her softly, then the sleeping baby in her arms. "Thank you for not marrying the man you came to marry." Penelope smiled up at the cowboy who had taught her that love and security weren't opposing choices, but the same gift, differently named. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me choose freely." As twilight deepened into night, the family gathered inside around the hearth, secure in the knowledge that they had built something rare and precious together, a love as vast as the Wyoming sky and as enduring as the mountains that cradled their home.